Hey guys, tonight we are stepping straight into 1895, opening your eyes not in your familiar bed, but in a cavernous room lined with silk draperies, heavy with dust, and adorned with a bed canopy that could probably shelter a small family of raccoons. You are now, through some mysterious historical loophole, a dollar princess, the daughter of a wealthy American family whose fortune is about to patch up the leaky roofs of some struggling English aristocrat. You might be excited at first. After all, the wallpaper is golden, the chandelier twinkles faintly in the morning light. But you'll soon realize this life is not quite the fairy tale you imagined. You probably won't survive this, at least not without tripping over your skirts or offending someone about whether jam or cream goes first on a scone. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from tonight and what time it is as you drift off. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The bed is enormous, the mattress lumpy, in ways that your body doesn't quite appreciate. Morning light leaks through a tall window framed with velvet curtains that were clearly chosen long before electricity was standard. The room smells faintly of coal soot and lavender water, because this is how your maid prepared things last night, sprinkling scents to mask the ever-present damp. You shift, hearing the rustle of linen sheets that cost more than most working families would see in a year. That thought alone is dizzying. But then again, dizzying sums of money are the very reason you're here. You sit up, only to discover you're already being watched, or rather, anticipated. A maid enters without knocking, carrying a tray of tea and dry toast. She does not ask whether you want tea. She assumes you do. This is England, after all. You manage a polite nod, though she raises an eyebrow at the accent that slips from your mouth. Your American vowels are noticeable here, as glaring as if you had walked in wearing bright red pajamas. Historians still argue whether the English aristocracy of the time genuinely found American manners charming, or whether they merely tolerated them in exchange for cash. Either way, your dowry is enormous, so your tea may taste faintly of resentment, but will still be poured properly. As you sip, you notice your nightdress feels oddly restrictive. That's because last night, before bed, your maid had already laced you lightly into a corset so your waist would wake up trained. It is not especially comfortable, and you can't help but imagine the inventor must have been someone who despised breathing. The mainstream historical fact here: by the late 19th century, corsetry was still considered essential, though not necessarily as suffocating as Victorian myth makes it out to be. The quirky tidbit: some American heiresses supposedly requested lighter corsets to be smuggled in because they refused to surrender their ribs to English fashion tyranny. You wish you had thought to smuggle one too. The room itself is less gilded than the title princess suggests. The fire has gone out, leaving the chamber chilled. Despite your mountain of blankets, the carpet is worn thin at the edges, and if you glance up, you spot a crack in the ceiling plaster, shaped suspiciously like a goose. This is your first clue that the grand estates your family's money purchased into might not be as solvent as advertised. These noble families often owned castles, estates, titles, and histories, but very little actual cash. They needed you, or rather, your parents' bank account, to restore the grandeur. You are not just marrying into tradition, you are patching holes in it. As you shuffle toward the washstand, you realize there is no running hot water, only porcelain basins filled with lukewarm liquid. A maid discreetly offers to help you wash, and though you decline with American stubbornness, you cannot escape the fact that even simple hygiene here is a production. No taps, no tiled bathroom, just bowls, cloths, and the lingering sense that privacy is a luxury for common folk, not aristocrats with household staff. The joke's on you. Having 50 rooms does not mean you get a single decent bathtub. You pull the bell cord, and suddenly the room bustles with activity. 2 maids, 1 footman, and someone whose job title you cannot identify appear. They seem to know exactly how to maneuver your body into garments you barely understand. Layers of petticoats, stockings, and that corset tightened again. You feel less like a person and more like a ship being rigged for sea. Historians debate whether the average young woman of your class resented or embraced this process. Some sources suggest American heiresses relished the drama, enjoying the sense of transformation. Others hint they privately longed for the simpler shirtwaists and bicycle skirts back home, finally dressed in a day gown of pale silk with more buttons than should exist outside an abacus. You glance in the mirror. The reflection stares back at you, hair arranged in carefully sculpted waves, a hat perched at the perfect, improbable angle. You do not recognize this creature. You wonder if the English lord, who soon will be your husband, recognizes you either, or if you're just a golden ticket with a pulse. A gentle knock announces the butler. Yes, there is a butler, and he informs you in grave tones that breakfast is served. His accent rolls like gravel, and he doesn't bother hiding the flicker of amusement at your newness. You nod, rehearsing the polite phrases you've been taught, hoping you won't say, "Have a nice day," and scandalize the table. Because, in this world, simple phrases are fraught with social landmines. You take one last look around the room, noting again the cracks, the soot, the faded tapestries. This is not quite the fantasy castle you may have imagined, but it is yours now, or at least as yours as anything can be when purchased by a transatlantic dowry. You straighten your back, inhale shallowly through the corset, and prepare to step into the life of a dollar princess. You descend the sweeping staircase, each polished step creaking in protest, as though reminding you that it has seen centuries of lords and ladies before you. The air grows cooler as you enter the grand hall, and the smell of toasted bread and coal smoke wafts toward you. Breakfast in your new aristocratic household is not the simple eggs and bacon affair you knew back home. No, here it is more like a ceremony, half meal, half social trial, and you are the unwilling star performer. The dining room is lined with dark oak paneling, hung with family portraits, whose eyes follow you suspiciously. Most of them look like they'd rather you weren't here at all. Ancestors who could never have imagined their descendants marrying Americans with railroads instead of royal blood. At the table, your new in-laws sit stiffly, already halfway through their morning ritual. You notice the silence first. No idle chatter, no clattering plates, Just the delicate sound of teaspoons against china. One false move, and you could become the subject of whispered ridicule for months. A servant sets down your place. Porridge, kippers, soft-boiled eggs, marmalade, and of course, the ever-present pot of tea. Coffee is available, but barely tolerated, much like you. You try not to drown the porridge in sugar, aware that your American sweet tooth is viewed as another charmingly vulgar habit. The mainstream fact here is that British aristocrats prized restraint at table. Food was to be eaten neatly, sparingly, with no loud remarks about how delicious it was. A quirky tidbit: some households had entire arguments over how runny an egg should be, with family members keeping time by tiny egg sand glasses. You eye your egg nervously, half expecting a debate to erupt if you crack it too quickly. Your husband sits at the far end of the table, reading the Times with the kind of aloof detachment that makes you wonder whether you're married to a man or to a well-upholstered chair. He glances up only once, when you struggle with a fish knife shaped like a miniature scythe. Historians still argue whether these endless utensils were genuinely necessary or simply invented to make newcomers feel foolish. Judging by your present humiliation, you lean toward the latter. The tea is poured, golden and steaming. You lift your cup carefully, pinky tucked discreetly against the porcelain. Someone once told you never to stick it out, but never to curl it in either. And now you're not sure where your pinky belongs. You choose the middle path and hope no one notices. The butler looms behind you, expression unreadable. You swear he is writing a mental report on your teaspoon technique. Your mother-in-law finally speaks, her voice clipped as she inquires about your sleep. You admit that the mattress was a little lumpy, then instantly regret it when she raises an eyebrow, high enough to scrape the ceiling. Apparently, criticizing the bed is akin to insulting the bloodline. You smile quickly and praise the curtains instead, though honestly, they smelled faintly of mothballs. Halfway through the meal, the silence is broken by your father-in-law's rambling lecture on estate finances. He explains how the roof needs repair, the stables need refurbishing, and the tenants need appeasing, all with the air of a man reminding himself why your fortune was invited into this family. You nod politely, though you know very little about tenant farming. Back home, fortunes were made in steel, oil, or railroads, not in arguing about sheep. As you nibble on toast, you realize how much breakfast etiquette is about invisibility. You are not meant to enjoy, only to endure gracefully. A wrong bite, a crumb too large, or a cough in the wrong place, and you risk being branded as unschooled in manners. You start to understand that these aristocrats have made an art form out of watching one another eat in near silence. It is, in its way, more gladiatorial than any Roman Colosseum. The quirky joke of the moment comes when you're offered marmalade. You spread it generously, only to discover it is bitter enough to strip wallpaper. You fight to keep your expression neutral, while your brother-in-law smirks faintly behind his teacup. The British palate, you realize, has a fondness for things that taste vaguely medicinal. Perhaps this is why gin is so beloved. After an hour, yes, an entire hour, of what feels like delicate hostage negotiations, disguised as breakfast, the meal ends. Chairs scrape back, Servants clear plates with military precision, and you are left wondering if you passed the test. Probably not, but at least you didn't accidentally butter the fish. As the family drifts toward the drawing room, you trail behind, your mind buzzing with questions. Why must toast be cut in soldiers? Why does no one laugh in the mornings? Why does your husband treat the newspaper as though it were scripture? You suspect you'll never find clear answers. Historians still debate whether these aristocratic silences reflected genuine dignity or simply chronic indigestion. You breathe deeply, your corset reminding you once more of its unrelenting grip. Day one is only just beginning, and already you long for the casual breakfasts of home. Coffee poured strong, conversation flowing freely, and nobody caring if you licked jam off your fingers. Instead, here you are, rehearsing your next smile for the drawing room, about to be quizzed again on your ability to look noble, while secretly feeling like an imposter in silk. You are led back upstairs after breakfast, only to discover that your day has only truly begun. The act of being dressed earlier was merely the warm-up. Now comes the real production, the full costume of a duchess in training. Your maid greets you with a look of grim purpose, as if preparing a knight for battle. And honestly, that is not too far off. The dressing room is lined with wardrobes the size of coffins, each one bulging with silks, satins, velvets, and more lace than you ever thought could exist outside of a wedding shop. The air smells faintly of starch, rosewater, and mothballs. On the central table lies a weapons cache of combs, ribbons, pins, and stays. You take a seat before the vanity, the mirror showing a face that looks more nervous than noble. Your maid begins with the corset, lacing it with the brisk efficiency of someone trained to ignore complaints. Each tug pulls your ribs closer together until you are reminded, yet again, that breathing is apparently optional for the aristocracy. The mainstream historical fact here. By the 1890s, corsets had shifted slightly from rigid waist crushers to more flexible health corsets, designed to emphasize posture rather than suffocation. That doesn't mean they were comfortable. The quirky tidbit: some women reportedly fainted, not from tight lacing, but because fainting was considered stylishly delicate. You wonder if you should practice collapsing gracefully just in case. Layers of undergarments follow: chemise, petticoats, and stockings clipped by garters. Each piece feels like a sentence added to your daily imprisonment. The maid mutters about your American curves, less willowy than the English ideal, and sighs as if she must wrestle your figure into submission. You try to remind yourself that historians still argue whether women truly believed in the so-called hourglass ideal, or whether fashion magazines were simply bullying them. Judging by the tugging at your waist, you lean toward bullying. Next comes the gown. Today's choice is pale lavender silk, with puffed sleeves so large they could serve as flotation devices. The bodice bristles with buttons, each one hand-sewn and impossible to fasten without help. As the fabric settles around you, you feel less like a woman and more like a frosted cake. Your maid steps back to admire her work, tilting her head critically. "Hat," she announces, as though declaring a military maneuver. Hats are not mere accessories, they are declarations. The one chosen for you is wide-brimmed, festooned with ostrich feathers and a single artificial rose. When she sets it upon your coiffed hair, the weight nearly topples you. You imagine ducking through doorways will now be a recurring challenge. The quirky joke you tell yourself is that if you get lost in Hyde Park later, rescuers could locate you by your orbiting feathers alone. Hairstyling itself is another ordeal. The maid heats curling irons over a small gas flame, then twirls your hair into sculpted waves that defy gravity. One strand singes faintly, and you wonder how many heiresses before you ended up with accidental scorch marks. Historians debate whether women genuinely tolerated these dangerous contraptions, or whether they simply lacked better options. Either way, your scalp smells faintly of burnt sugar, and you sigh as another curl is pinned into place. The finishing touch is gloves. Long, white, and snug, they slip over your hands like symbols of your new status. You wiggle your fingers and wonder how you'll ever manage to pick anything up again. Gloves in this world are not about warmth or utility. They are armor, separating you from the grime of reality. Finally, at last, you stand before the mirror. The creature gazing back at you could not possibly be the same person who once wore shirtwaists and walked barefoot on American grass. Your waist is pinched, your posture perfect, your hat absurdly proud. You are a mannequin of aristocratic aspiration. Somewhere beneath all this silk and lace, you still exist, though muffled like a voice under heavy blankets. You practice a smile, one that suggests both refinement and mild boredom. This is essential. Enthusiasm is considered gauche. The aristocratic trick is to appear as though life is one long inconvenience you're too dignified to complain about. You rehearse it now, lips curving in a way that feels foreign, hoping it will pass inspection downstairs. Your maid steps back, satisfied. "Ready," she says, with the finality of a judge banging a gavel. You, on the other hand, feel ready only for a nap. But instead of rest, you are led toward the waiting carriage, prepared to display yourself like a decorative vase to London society. As you walk, the gown swishes around your ankles, the sound like distant whispers following you down the corridor. You steady yourself, inhaling shallowly, praying that no button bursts under the strain of your ribcage. This is the reality of being a dollar princess. You are both treasure chest and prisoner, gift-wrapped for public approval, yet privately yearning for breath. The carriage ride awaits, polished black with gleaming brass fittings, as though it were freshly scrubbed just to carry you down London's most fashionable lanes. A footman opens the door with the solemnity of a priest, and you climb in, careful not to catch your lavender silk on the step. Inside, the cushions are stiff, smelling faintly of horsehair and lavender polish, and you sit upright because the corset doesn't exactly allow for slouching. Soon, you're trundling through the gates and onto the streets, the clip-clop of hooves steady as a metronome. Outside the window, London awakens. Newspaper boys shouting headlines, hansom cabs darting like beetles, the distant foggy haze rising from the Thames. But you are headed not to the grit of the city. You are on display in Hyde Park, the favored arena of aristocratic social life. The Row, as it's called, is already bustling with other carriages. riders on horseback, and pedestrians, all perfectly aware that they are both audience and performers in this daily theater. Here, the social rule is simple. To be seen is to exist, and as a dollar princess, you are expected to be seen, preferably glowing, poised, and very obviously attached to your new, noble husband. You glance across at him now, sitting beside you with an air of detached duty. He tips his hat occasionally to passing acquaintances, and you realize his nods are less about greeting and more about silent ledger entries. Who is worth acknowledging? Who is not? The mainstream historical fact. By the late 19th century, Hyde Park's carriage parades were as much about maintaining status as about leisure. Appearances there mattered almost as much as appearing at court. The quirky tidbit? Some American heiresses complained in letters home that their cheeks ached from smiling at strangers for hours during these processions. You can already feel a similar cramp developing. As your carriage rolls forward, you catch glimpses of fashionable ladies peering at you through opera glasses, whispering behind gloved hands. They've read about you in the society pages. The wealthy American girl, newly imported, her dowry rumored to rival some small nation's treasuries. You try to look unbothered, though inside you're wondering if the ostrich feathers on your hat are bobbing too enthusiastically. Your husband clears his throat, pointing discreetly to a duchess riding past on a magnificent horse. That's the Duchess of Devonshire, he mutters, as though presenting an exhibit at a museum. You nod politely, committing the name to memory, though it feels like trying to memorize the entire British Museum in one afternoon. Historians still argue whether these outings were genuinely enjoyable for aristocrats or whether they were endured like exams. Judging by the stiff posture of everyone involved, you lean toward the exam theory. Children dart about the park, nannies chasing them, while flower sellers weave through the crowd offering violets and roses. You long to step down, buy a flower, smell it freely, but you remain enclosed in the carriage, a butterfly pinned beneath glass. The closest you come is the faint waft of horse manure that mingles with the perfume of roses, a reminder that aristocratic glamour is always built atop very real smells. As the carriage halts briefly, you overhear two elderly ladies commenting on your gown. American taste, one sniffs. So exuberant, you smile serenely, though internally you picture dropping marmalade into her lap. The joke you quietly savor is that her gown looks like a sofa covering, but you wisely keep this thought to yourself. Your husband greets a viscount, bowing slightly. You practice your genteel nod, careful not to disturb your hat. The viscount peers at you with mild curiosity, then launches into a discussion of pheasant numbers on his estate. You nod again, lips curved in that carefully rehearsed, bored but pleasant smile. Inwardly, you're screaming for a conversation about literally anything else. Maybe baseball statistics, maybe the new phonograph craze. But alas, you are trapped in the polite drudgery of aristocratic small talk. The parade continues. Endless faces, endless bows, endless scrutiny. You feel your spine stiffen with each passing glance, your shoulders aching under the weight of social expectation. This is not leisure. This is theater, and you are both performer and prop. By the time the carriage finally turns away from the park, you exhale with relief, the feathers on your hat trembling as though sighing with you. You have survived your first real parade of appearances, though you suspect many more await. For now, you are grateful to retreat to the relative quiet of the estate, where you can at least unstick your smile from your face. Still, you cannot shake the awareness that in this world, every outing is a test, and every nod or glance another entry in society's invisible ledger. You hardly have time to unclench your jaw from all that carriage smiling before you are escorted to another battlefield, one far more perilous than Hyde Park, the tea table. Tea, you quickly discover, is not simply a drink in this world. It is a ritual, a performance, and occasionally a weapon. The drawing room is warm with the glow of a coal fire, though the chill of the English afternoon still seeps through the tall windows. A lace-draped table sits in the center, already laid with porcelain cups, saucers, plates of sponge cake, and those infamous scones that will soon test your diplomatic skills. Around the table sit a cluster of ladies in towering hats, their feathers bristling like rival birds sizing you up. They are members of the local aristocracy, summoned partly to welcome you, partly to inspect whether you are fit to join their ranks. You are guided to a chair, gloves peeled off by your maid with the precision of someone disarming a bomb. The hostess, your husband's cousin, smiles warmly, though her eyes flicker with curiosity as sharp as a hawk's. "You must tell us," she begins. "Is it true that in America one eats muffins with syrup?" You manage a polite laugh, assuring her that not every breakfast involves maple trees, though inwardly you wonder if you should have brought a bottle to prove your homeland's merits. The tea is poured, steaming amber liquid filling the delicate cups. You stir gently, aware that even the clink of a spoon against porcelain can draw raised eyebrows. The mainstream historical fact: afternoon tea had, by the 1890s, become a cornerstone of upper-class social life, serving both as refreshment and as an arena for gossip. The quirky tidbit: debates over whether to add milk before or after the tea could last longer than the actual drinking. You cautiously follow your neighbor's example, milk second, hoping you have chosen the correct team in this unending civil war. Then comes the scone. Ah, the innocent-looking baked good that hides a battlefield beneath its golden crust. On the table sit bowls of clotted cream and jam. The question: which goes first? In Devon, tradition dictates cream before jam. In Cornwall, it is jam before cream. You hover indecisively, aware that your choice may be taken as a declaration of allegiance. Historians still argue whether this seemingly trivial matter truly divided counties, or whether it was exaggerated later for comic effect. All you know is that the women around you are watching like hawks. You choose jam first, partly because it looks less slippery, and you feel the subtle rustle of judgment ripple through the room. Conversation shifts to gossip. Who danced too often with the same partner last season? Whose carriage broke down in front of the opera? Who ordered their gowns from Paris instead of London? The topics sound trivial, yet the tones are razor sharp, each tidbit weighed for hidden meaning. You nod along, contributing carefully, though you can't help but compare it to the gossip you grew up with. Back home, people whispered about business deals and railroad strikes. not whether Lady Penelope's pearls were fake. Still, you laugh at the right moments, your new social smile starting to feel permanently glued to your face. A lady across the table leans forward, voice low, and tell us, how do Americans entertain themselves? Do you truly dance without chaperones? The room leans in, eager for scandal. You explain as delicately as you can that yes, Americans sometimes dance more freely, though your family certainly kept things proper. Their eyes widen in fascination, as if you had confessed to running with pirates. You realize that to them, you are not just a guest. You are an exotic curiosity, equal parts novelty and cautionary tale. The cakes are passed around, delicate slices of sponge layered with cream. You accept one, careful not to drop crumbs onto your gown. The taste is sweet, airy, yet somehow unsatisfying, like a whisper of sugar rather than a proper dessert. You long for the hearty pies of home, but here, restraint is the flavor of the day, the quirky joke you file away. You're not sure whether the cake is meant to be eaten or simply admired as a proof of restraint. As the plates are cleared, you realize that tea has lasted nearly 2 hours. 2 hours of careful nodding, delicate bites, and the tightrope act of appearing charming without being forward, amusing without being vulgar. Your jaw aches again, your corset digs in, and your mind spins with the awareness that when misplaced, comment could brand you forever as that American girl with dreadful manners. When the guests finally depart, leaving behind the faint scent of perfume and feathers, you sag slightly in your chair. Your cousin by marriage pats your hand. Well done, she says softly, as though you had survived a trial by fire. And perhaps you have. You survived the tea table, which is no small feat. As you rise, you glance back at the table, crumbs and empty cups, standing as mute witnesses to the duel of etiquette you've just endured. Tomorrow, there will be another tea, and the day after that, another. It strikes you that the aristocratic world runs less on politics and more on pastry. If bread is the staff of life, scones are the staff of status. The next challenge comes not with tea and scones, but with ink and paper. For in this world, letters are not just correspondence. They are an art form, a declaration of refinement, and sometimes a weapon wielded with more precision than a dueling pistol. Your maid sets a small writing desk before you, its surface gleaming, its compartments neatly stocked with paper thick as card, envelopes lined with tissue, and a small pot of ink black enough to blot out the sun. The pen, a delicately carved fountain with a gold nib, feels oddly heavy in your hand, as though it carries not just ink, but the weight of centuries of etiquette. You are expected to write thank you notes, dozens of them, for flowers received, for invitations extended, for the mere honor of having been seen in the company of others. In America, you had dashed off quick lines, many thanks, yours truly, and no one blinked. Here, however, each phrase must be balanced, each word must shine like cut glass. Too brief, and you risk seeming careless. Too effusive, and you may appear insincere. The historical fact. By the late 19th century, letter writing had become an essential tool of aristocratic networking. Families kept entire albums of correspondence, evidence of alliances and friendships that could stretch across decades. A single note could carry immense social weight, sometimes more than an in-person conversation. The quirky tidbit? Some households employed secretaries whose sole duty was to mimic the handwriting of the mistress when her wrist grew tired. After all, polite gratitude should never show strain. You begin with Lady Agatha, who hosted the tea yesterday. Your first attempt runs long, brimming with genuine thanks, but your cousin gently shakes her head. Too much warmth, she advises. You'll appear over-eager. Pare it down. So you rewrite, and again, until your note is a study in balance, polite, gracious, but with just enough coolness to show restraint. Next comes Lord Henry, who complimented your gown. A short note will suffice, your cousin explains. But mind your phrasing. Never say you were honored by his remark, only that you were pleased. Honored implies inferiority, and that will not do. You scratch the word out, trying not to blot the paper. Already your hand aches, and you've written only 3 sentences. The ink itself seems to conspire against you. One drop too heavy, and it smudges across the page. You attempt to blot it quickly, but the result is a gray smear that looks distressingly like a bruise. The maid whisks the ruined page away, as if it were a corpse to be buried in secret, replacing it with a fresh sheet. Letter after letter, you labor. Each one must be addressed with proper titles. No Mr. where Lord is due. No omission of a middle initial if it belongs to a bishop. The very envelopes feel like traps, the seals like verdicts, and the signatures, oh, the signatures. Yours must always be sincerely, never yours, unless the recipient is family, and certainly never with love, unless you want to spark scandal. A curious thing happens as you write. You realize that letters in this world are less about information than about performance. Everyone already knows what happened at the tea, who was present, who spoke, who spilled a drop of jam on their cuff. The letter is not to tell, but to frame, to polish, to ensure that when your name is mentioned, it glitters properly in the collective memory. As you struggle with your 12th note, you recall another historical detail. Some young ladies practiced their handwriting for hours, creating loops and curls so ornate they resembled lacework. Handwriting itself was considered a mark of character. A blot could imply carelessness, an uneven line, moral weakness. Your own script, though neat, feels clumsy under the scrutiny of centuries. By the time the stack is finished, you feel as though you've run a marathon without leaving your chair. Your cousin inspects the pile, nodding at each one, occasionally suggesting a word change. But at last, she pronounces them fit for posting. Fit for posting. 2 words that feel like a royal decree. The maid gathers the letters, tying them with a ribbon, before dispatching them to the post. You watch them disappear, knowing that within days they will circulate through parlors and drawing rooms, each one a tiny ambassador of your reputation. Your hand is cramped, your back stiff, and your ink-stained fingers look as though you've been mining coal. Yet you've passed another trial. You survived the battlefield of ink, where words can wound and blotches can scar. You lean back in your chair, exhaling. Somewhere in the house, the clock chimes. Another day nearly gone, another skirmish endured. You begin to suspect that aristocratic life is less about grand dinners and more about constant small wars. Wars fought not with swords, but with spoons, not with armies, but with adjectives. And yet, somehow, each battle leaves you more exhausted than the last. Morning dawns again, and with it, a new trial. Today, you are to learn the delicate art of calling, not the shouting across the garden kind of calling, but the genteel practice of paying social visits, which is an entire universe of its own, and an intricate ballet performed on doorsteps and in drawing rooms across Victorian Britain. You are told at breakfast that your cards are ready, not playing cards, not business cards, but calling cards. Small, stiff rectangles embossed with your name, your address, and nothing else. They are the currency of the aristocratic world, the polite tokens that open doors and close others. Without them, you are invisible. With them, you are a force. The butler presents them in a small silver tray, each one pristine. You pick one up, surprised at its weight. It feels heavier than it should, as though burdened by all the expectations attached to it. Your cousin explains that you must never, under any circumstance, write messages on them. That would be vulgar. The card itself is message enough. How it is presented, folded or not, cornered or not, signals volumes. Historical fact. In Victorian England, calling cards were a sophisticated system of social communication. Leaving a corner folded indicated you had visited in person. Folding the top right corner meant congratulations, while the bottom right indicated condolences. Sometimes, a person's entire reputation could rise or fall depending on the quality of their cards and the precision of their etiquette. Quirky tidbit: some fashionable young men carried multiple sets of cards, each with slight variations, tailored to impress different audiences. You climb into the carriage, cards tucked neatly in a case, and set out for the day's round of calls. The streets are alive with similar carriages, each carrying well-dressed figures, embarking on the same ritual. You realize that this is less about visiting friends than about staking territory, ensuring that your name is seen, remembered, and placed in the right order in the vast hierarchy of society. At the first house, the butler greets you. You are not invited in. Instead, you hand him your card on the tray. He inclines his head and disappears, and you are left to return to the carriage. That was a call. You did not exchange a word with the lady of the house, yet you have acknowledged her, and she, by receiving your card, acknowledges you. The next house is different. You are admitted into the drawing room, where Lady Smythe awaits. Here begins another layer of complexity. The visit must not last more than 15 minutes. Too short, and you seem rude. Too long, and you overstay your welcome. A small clock discreetly ticks on the mantelpiece, a silent judge of your timing. You sip tea again, but carefully. No biscuit this time, as crumbs might linger too long. Conversation is light, almost weightless. You mention the weather, the season, the health of her roses. Lady Smythe smiles, nods, and makes similar remarks. It feels almost absurd, this performance of polite trivialities. Yet you sense that every word is measured, every tone weighed. By the third call, you are exhausted. Each entrance and exit requires precision. Gloves must be removed at the correct moment. Curtsies made neither too deep nor too shallow. Cards handed over with neither haste nor hesitation. Your head spins with rules. When entering, do not walk ahead of the hostess. When seated, do not perch on the edge of the chair, but do not sprawl. When departing, never glance back at the clock, though you are secretly timing every second. A historical aside slips into your memory. For aristocratic ladies, an entire morning could be consumed by making and receiving calls. Carriages queued outside houses, like a modern rush hour, each one discharging a lady in silks who would stay precisely a quarter hour before moving on. The endless circulation of faces and names was the very fabric of their social world. There are humiliations too. At one grand townhouse, you present your card, but the butler returns with a polite refusal. Her ladyship is not at home. The phrase, you are told, is never literal. It means she is home, but she does not wish to see you. The rejection is delivered with such smoothness, it almost feels kind. But it is not kind. It is a quiet strike, one that leaves no bruise, but plenty of sting. As the carriage rattles on, your cousin explains that such refusals are common. One must accept them gracefully, for to bristle is to admit weakness. The goal, she says, is not to visit, but to be seen visiting. The logic is dizzying, but you nod as though it makes sense. By the time you return home, the stack of cards is thinner, your spirit as creased as the gloves you've pulled on and off a dozen times. The footman gathers the remaining cards and places them back in the tray, as if to remind you, tomorrow the ritual will begin again. You collapse onto a chaise, realizing that aristocratic life is not so much lived as managed. Every moment, tea, letters, calls, is a transaction, a negotiation, a performance. And yet, beneath it all, there is a strange elegance, a choreography of gestures so precise it borders on dance. You close your eyes briefly, your mind buzzing with folded corners, silver trays, and the words "not at home." For all its polish, this world is relentless. Every gesture matters. Every silence speaks. Every card carries more weight than it has any right to bear. The next morning, before you have even finished your tea, you're informed of another duty, attending a morning call. You groan inwardly, thinking it will be the same endless sequence of carriages, cards, and clock watching. But today, you learn that calls are only the opening act. Beyond them lies a greater arena of aristocratic endurance. The afternoon visit. This time, you are ushered not into a drawing room, but into a morning room, a space reserved for informal meetings. Do not be misled, however. The rules are no less rigid. You are shown to a chair near a window, and almost immediately tea is brought in, along with a plate of sandwiches cut into triangles so small they resemble postage stamps. A polite hostess insists you try one. You obey and discover that chewing quietly, with no sound and no crumb visible, is harder than surviving a battlefield. Conversation drifts from the weather to news from the continent. Nothing is said too loudly or too seriously. Opinions, you quickly learn, must be dressed as lightly as the cucumber on your sandwich. Even laughter is restrained, no more than a gentle trill. Anything beyond that would be vulgar. Historical fact: in Victorian society, afternoons were reserved for an endless carousel of visiting. A single lady might receive dozens of callers between noon and 5 o'clock, each one staying exactly the prescribed length of time. If a guest overstayed, the hostess would begin to make subtle signals, placing her teacup down more firmly, smoothing her skirts, or rising ever so slightly. Quirky tidbit: in some households, clocks were deliberately set 5 minutes fast to hasten reluctant guests out the door. The ritual deepens when gentlemen begin to arrive. At once, the atmosphere shifts. You notice how the ladies adjust their postures, smoothing ribbons and straightening gloves. The men bow with precision, one hand behind the back, the other lightly touching the brim of their hats. Every gesture is choreographed, and you, caught between admiration and exhaustion, attempt to copy them without looking like a parody. Soon, you are introduced to the art of group conversation. It is unlike anything you've ever experienced. A topic begins with one lady mentioning the success of a recent charity bazaar. Another adds a detail. A gentleman supplies a witty remark, and yet another lady counters with a gentle correction. The conversation flows not like a river, but like a lace pattern, delicate, looping, with no loose threads. You, when prompted, add a word about the weather, safe and bland, and it seems to pass muster. But you are warned: never monopolize, never contradict, and never, under any circumstances, speak of money, politics, or religion. These were the pillars of society, and thus too heavy to be placed on so fragile a table. Should you slip and mention such things, the silence that follows would be colder than a December draft. As the hours stretch on, you begin to sense the rhythm. Every visit, every card, every curtsy builds a map of alliances, rivalries, and reputations. A successful afternoon is not measured in enjoyment, but in how gracefully you navigated the invisible threads. You realize this world is a performance of endless subtleties, where the wrong length of stay or the wrong tone of voice could cost you invitations for weeks. By 4 o'clock, your head aches from smiling. The final house you enter is grander than the others. The drawing room decorated with velvet drapes and portraits in gilt frames. Here, you are not offered tea, but instead a glass of sherry. You hesitate. When is one supposed to sip, and how much? Your hostess solves the dilemma by speaking continuously, leaving you no chance to drink. You nod, glass untouched, as she delivers a monologue about her niece's engagement, which you suspect is less about informing you than about broadcasting her family's rising status. Historical aside, afternoon visits were so central to aristocratic life that London's entire social calendar revolved around them. Houses on fashionable streets like Belgravia or Mayfair became stages, where appearances mattered as much as conversations. To be seen entering and leaving the right homes was itself a form of social capital. By the time you returned to your own house, Your calling card case is nearly empty, your gloves are stretched at the seams, and your cheeks ache from practiced expressions. You think of how much effort has gone into what amounts, essentially, to sitting, sipping, and smiling. And yet, you understand why it matters. These visits are not trivial. They are the threads that weave reputations, alliances, and even marriages. As evening falls, you slump into your room, staring at your reflection in the mirror. You see someone who has survived another trial, though at great cost to your patience. For all its quietness, aristocratic life is no less exhausting than battle. Only here, the weapons are teacups, cards, and smiles sharp enough to wound. You set your gloves aside, vowing to master this art. But deep down, you cannot shake the suspicion that this world is not built for the uninitiated. It demands energy in every glance, every pause, every step, from the carriage to the drawing room, and it never stops. The following day, you are summoned to yet another kind of social gauntlet, the formal dinner. Compared to afternoon calls, dinners are not merely visits, but full-scale performances with 1,000 unwritten rules woven into the clink of silverware and the rustle of silk. You arrive at the house just before 8 o'clock, for to come too early would imply eagerness, and to come late would risk insult. The doorway is already crowded with guests removing gloves, cloaks, and hats, each step accompanied by an invisible orchestra of etiquette. A butler, dignified as a marble statue, announces each name with a voice so steady it could carry across a cathedral. Your own name sounds strange when uttered like a title, echoing off painted walls. The dining room is a marvel of order. A long, polished table gleams beneath the light of chandeliers, reflecting the glassware like 1,000 tiny stars. Each setting is arranged with geometric precision, forks on the left in descending size, knives and spoons to the right, crystal glasses above, like a miniature constellation. You are told there is meaning in the order. Each utensil is a cue in the choreography of the meal. Historical fact: Victorian dinners could include up to 10 courses, each one served in a strict order, beginning with soup and ending with sweets and fruit. Guests were expected to pace themselves, but never refuse a dish outright, for that would suggest an insult to the cook or host. When dinner begins, you learn the terror of placement. Each guest has been assigned a seat according to rank and relationship, the highest status person placed nearest the host. You, mercifully, are neither at the head nor the farthest end, but somewhere in the safe middle, where errors are less catastrophic, but still highly visible. The first course arrives. Soup. It looks harmless enough until you are reminded that soup is not to be slurped, blown upon, or spooned directly into the mouth. Instead, the spoon must be moved away from you, from the far edge of the bowl toward the near edge, and then lifted sideways to the lips. You attempt this maneuver and feel clumsy, as though trying to ladle liquid with surgical precision. Somehow, you avoid disaster. Conversation begins, and you are drawn into the equally complex world of table talk. You must only speak to the person on your right during the first course, and only to the person on your left during the next. This rotation continues, a strange verbal dance that prevents anyone from being monopolized or ignored. You quickly realize that timing is everything. Speak too long, and you may cause your neighbor to miss their chance with someone more important. Say too little, and you risk being labeled dull, quirky tidbit to signal the end of a course. The hostess would often drop her napkin lightly beside her plate. Guests were expected to stop eating instantly, whether they were finished or not. You can imagine the panic of someone still chewing as the servants whisked plates away. The meal continues. Fish, roast meats, vegetables, game, puddings. Each course demands its own set of utensils, which vanish and reappear like stage props. You follow the rule, work from the outside in, hoping not to mistake a fish fork for a dessert fork. Across the table, you see a gentleman pause, uncertain between two knives, and the collective tension is palpable. It is a duel without swords, where the first slip marks one's reputation for months. Between bites, you notice how much of dinner is not about food at all. It is about watching and being watched, about proving that you belong among people who can balance grace, appetite, and wit simultaneously. Every gesture, lifting a glass, unfolding a napkin, choosing a topic of conversation, becomes a test. As the roast course is cleared, you nearly make a fatal mistake by cutting all your meat at once. A sharp glance from your neighbor reminds you of the rule. Only cut one bite at a time, or risk appearing greedy and unschooled. You quickly adjust, pretending as though you meant to demonstrate restraint. Historical aside, Victorian dining also involved the art of signaling to servants. A knife and fork placed parallel across the plate meant one had finished, while crossed utensils indicated a pause. Such signals were vital, for speaking directly to the servants was considered poor form. The entire service was a silent ballet where dishes appeared and disappeared without words. By dessert, you are dizzy from the effort. A silver stand arrives bearing pyramids of fruit, which you must peel and cut delicately with special utensils. You attempt to dissect a pear without sending juice across the linen, all while responding to a polite question about whether you plan to attend the upcoming opera season. You nod, say something bland, and hope no one notices the pear slipping in your fingers. At last, the hostess signals the end. The ladies withdraw to the drawing room, leaving the men to their port and cigars. You follow the procession, relieved to have survived without spilling wine on your lap or dropping a fork onto the floor. In the drawing room, tea is once again offered, and you accept it gratefully, though you silently swear never to look at another teacup again. As the evening draws to a close, you reflect on the ordeal. Dinner, you realize, is not nourishment, but theater. It is a test of endurance, coordination, and memory, where the smallest misstep can undo hours of effort. You leave with a full stomach, but an empty reservoir of energy, your mind buzzing with knives, forks, and rules. And yet, as your carriage carries you home, you understand why this ritual endures. To master dinner is to prove oneself civilized, refined, worthy of notice. It is the battlefield of the drawing room, fought with silver and porcelain instead of swords. You collapse into bed, exhausted, rehearsing in your dreams the motions of spoon, fork, and knife. You may not yet belong, but you have survived another day in the gauntlet of aristocratic life. By now, you've learned that your primary function is not merely to drape yourself in satins and lace, but to serve as a sort of living diplomatic pouch, an American body wrapped in British trimmings, carrying fortunes across the ocean in exchange for names, titles, and perhaps even respectability. At breakfast, with its kippers and marmalade, you find yourself listening to the Duke's cousin describe the long list of marriage settlements being drawn up. You are reminded, subtly, and sometimes not so subtly, that what is being negotiated isn't just your hand, but your dowry. Millions of dollars, broken down into estates, incomes, and allowances, are being shuffled around on paper. Your father might call it business, your mother, romance, but the Duke's family calls it survival. The American press back home has a field day with this arrangement. Newspapers love to write about dollar princesses, young women from New York and Chicago who cross the Atlantic carrying fortunes like neatly packed trunks. They declare that you are the future of Anglo-American relations, even though your primary diplomatic duty seems to involve sitting still while someone debates how many servants you will be entitled to after marriage. The press exaggerates, of course, with caricatures showing you tossing sacks of gold at titled but penniless aristocrats. It's unfair, but you can't help smirking at the accuracy, since you've literally just watched your father sign off on checks that would keep a crumbling estate from going the way of weeds and ruin. In the London society, the whispers swirl around you like smoke in a drawing room. Some ladies think you're a savior, bringing fresh money to keep the ancient houses standing. Others think you're an interloper, an upstart with an accent just a touch too nasal, muscles from climbing Newport staircases instead of English riding paths. Historians still argue whether the phenomenon of the dollar princesses represented genuine social blending or simply a transactional exchange that papered over deeper cultural differences. You don't need a historian to tell you that right now it feels very much like a transaction, and one in which you are the most heavily guarded commodity. A fact for the day. By the end of the 19th century, more than 300 American heiresses married into European nobility. The scale of the practice was extraordinary, almost industrial. Entire genealogical maps were redrawn in a single generation, threading Manhattan money into aristocratic titles like needlework stitches, and the results varied widely. Some unions thrived, others collapsed spectacularly under the weight of cultural clash, scandal, or simple incompatibility. You may comfort yourself knowing that if your marriage falls apart, you won't be alone in the historical record. But the quirky detail you cling to this morning is that many British aristocrats joked about your kind by nicknaming you cattle at market, a phrase delivered with a wink, but not much subtlety. The image of being inspected like livestock, teeth, posture, breeding lines, all while sipping weak English tea, is enough to make you choke politely into your napkin. Still, you smile and remember that without you, many of these grand families would be one soggy roof tile away from ruin. The negotiations move beyond you, into legal chambers and counting houses, while you are ushered from one parlor to another, expected to look lovely and remain conveniently silent. The papers are drawn up in detail. What estates will revert to your children, what allowances will pass directly to your husband, and how your dowry will be divided between immediate debts and future investments. You're told you'll have PIN money, a quaint phrase for the personal allowance you'll receive, though it's laughable compared to the sums actually at stake. It's almost comic, the idea that after transferring millions of dollars, you'll be thrilled with a tidy monthly purse to buy ribbons and gloves. Meanwhile, your social duties increase. You're expected to glide effortlessly between afternoon teas in Mayfair and garden luncheons in Surrey. Charming dukes, duchesses, and distant cousins with a practiced laugh. You drop references to Shakespeare and Byron, even though you prefer American novels. At times, you wish you could slip away to a soda fountain. But in this world, even longing for an ice cream sundae feels scandalous. There's one evening that stands out in particular, a dinner at which a half-dozen noblemen casually discuss their crumbling roofs, leaky stables, and the urgent need for modern plumbing, all problems to be solved, somehow, with your dowry. You stir your soup and realize, with a mix of irony and fatigue, that your fortune is essentially being used as duct tape for the British aristocracy. At that moment, you imagine what your great-grandmother, who stitched quilts in a cabin, would say if she could see you now. Probably something like, "And they say you're the lucky one." Through all this, you practice your most important skill, nodding slowly, politely, sleepily, as the negotiations swirl around you. Every word is loaded, every silence intentional, and you have to remind yourself that your real task is not to solve these problems, but to endure them without fainting into the terrine. That, apparently, is the mark of true nobility. Morning in London begins not with roosters, but with the clatter of carriages, the rattle of milk carts, and the steady thrum of horses' hooves on wet cobblestones. You are awakened not by servants pulling open shutters, though there are plenty of those, but by the endless hum of a city that seems incapable of silence. The air smells faintly of coal, smoke, ink, and damp wool. London is not beautiful in the way American newspapers sometimes describe it. It is grimy, damp, and perpetually gray. But the city has a pulse, and you are expected to march to its rhythm. You are taken on a carriage ride down streets lined with tall Georgian houses, all built to match one another as though designed by a committee determined to stifle creativity. These homes may look imposing, but step inside, and you'll often find cracked plasters, smoky fireplaces that never quite draw properly, and staircases groaning under their age. Your fortune, of course, is supposed to plaster over these cracks. You can almost hear your dollars whistling through the drafty halls, promising to keep these houses standing for another century. But your schedule does not allow much reflection. Breakfast is a formal ordeal of kedgeree, toast racks, and boiled eggs. Then it's fittings with the dressmaker, who insists you must have gowns and shades that flatter the famously dreary London weather. After that, a driving lesson in Hyde Park, carefully supervised so that you don't accidentally overtake someone of higher rank. which would be a calamity of etiquette. And then the afternoon teas, endless, endless teas, where porcelain cups are filled and emptied, while conversation circles like smoke around the topics of lineage, scandals, and who has the best roses this season. Society, it seems, has its own strange rituals. For instance, the seating arrangements at a dinner party are like a military campaign, every chair carefully calculated to prevent offense or scandal. You quickly discover that you are considered both exotic and useful, the way someone might admire a rare hothouse orchid. People lean close to hear your accent, then laugh softly behind their napkins. You are fascinating, but always slightly out of place. It is as if you are meant to sparkle just enough to be admired, but never so much that you outshine the host. The newspapers continue to follow you, as though your every step provides fresh fodder for their readers. Columns describe your gowns, your mannerisms, and even your posture while entering a carriage. They note how you smile, how you curtsy, how you stand beside your future husband, as though you are a porcelain figurine placed just so on a mantelpiece. Back in America, these articles are consumed eagerly, painted as glamorous dispatches from across the Atlantic. Here in London, they are read with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism, like society's version of a weather forecast. The truth, of course, is less glittering. The reality of being a dollar princess involves more yawning than swooning, more pinched shoes than diamonds, and more hours of sitting politely in drafty parlors than dancing in candlelit ballrooms. You discover that English interiors are chilly, not just because of the climate, but because of the peculiar British habit of heating only one room at a time, while fireplaces crackle in the drawing room. The bedrooms remain cold enough to see your breath. You burrow into bed beneath mountains of blankets and wonder how anyone survives a winter here. Even the food conspires to make you homesick. You find yourself longing for American oysters, corn on the cob, and a scoop of ice cream from a soda fountain. Instead, you are offered endless variations of boiled beef, stewed mutton, and puddings in shades of beige that defy description. You smile politely, but secretly, you dream of sending a crate of Chicago beef or New England apples across the ocean just to rescue dinner from its monotony. Yet, despite all this, there is a certain quiet pride in what you represent. You are part of something larger than yourself, a peculiar cultural exchange written not in treaties, but in marriages. You are proof that the old world and the new world can be stitched together, however clumsily, through silks, jewels, and legal contracts. You may not feel at home, but you are part of a story that will fill entire chapters in history books. And so, when you step out of the carriage at yet another evening ball, chin lifted, gown sweeping, you remind yourself that you are not just a guest. You are the investment, the spectacle, and in some ways, the future. The evening ball is less a celebration and more a test. Chandeliers drip with light, orchestras swell with practiced precision, and every eye in the gilded room turns to evaluate the newest arrivals. The ball is not simply about dancing, it is about cataloging. Who wears what, who bows to who is seen laughing too long at the wrong person's joke. You are paraded across the marble floor like a prize mare, jewels borrowed from the family safe sparkling against the candlelight. And although you know your role, to smile, to curtsy, to glide across the dance floor, as though the air itself has been trained to part for you, the weight of 100 gazes makes the task nearly impossible. Your dance partners are not chosen for their ability to waltz gracefully. They are chosen because of their titles, their family connections, and their mother's insistence that they be seen with someone suitably impressive. You are twirled by viscounts who step on your hem, barons who drone on about their hunting, dogs, and a duke who smells faintly of tobacco and mothballs. The conversations are riddles of understatement. When an Englishman declares that something is rather good, you must interpret this as high praise. When he says not entirely dreadful, he may mean it was a triumph. The entire ballroom is a code, and you're expected to learn it without error. Meanwhile, matrons in elaborate gowns lurk at the edges, watching your every move. They whisper behind fans, measuring you like jewelers, examining a stone. Are you cut correctly? Do you glitter enough? Will you, with your American dollars, polish their son's estate into solvency? Their stares are coldly practical, but their smiles are painted on as carefully as rouge. You realize that your own family back home in New York has been no less calculating. You are not here for love. You are here for a merger. And in this ballroom, your ability to dance gracefully is less important than your ability to play your part in the transaction. There are moments of strange beauty, too. The sweep of a waltz beneath soaring ceilings. The way candlelight softens the faces of even the sternest dowagers. The glitter of gowns like petals scattered across the floor. Sometimes, just for an instant, you forget the weight of the bargain and allow yourself to imagine that you are simply a girl at a dance, whirling through the music without consequence. But then the music ends. Your hand is relinquished, and you are reminded by a chaperone's nod, by a journalist's scribbled notes, that every step is recorded, every smile accounted for. The press, of course, will describe it differently. Tomorrow's paper will praise your elegance, the daring cut of your gown, the way you were seen laughing with the Duke, the Marquise, the Viscount. Readers back home will picture you as a fairy tale princess in a land of castles and chandeliers. They will not read about the aching feet, the headaches from too tight corsets, or the gnawing loneliness that follows you from ballroom to carriage to bedroom. They will not know how exhausting it is to be an ornament in a story someone else is writing. The night stretches on, one quadrille bleeding into another, until the candles sputter and the orchestra packs away their instruments. Carriages line up outside, wheels splashing through puddles, lamps glowing like tired fireflies. You are escorted out, your cheeks aching from smiling, your ears ringing with polite chatter that refuses to quiet. The ball has done its work. Alliances hinted, impressions made, reputations reinforced. And then, finally, the night draws to a close. Now, as the last carriage rolls through the damp streets, the noise of the ballroom fades into silence. You sink into soft cushions, jewels glinting faintly in the lamplight, your body weary, but your mind strangely calm. The grand experiment of the dollar princesses girls traded like gilded coins between nations, has always been less about fairy tales and more about endurance. Yet within the machinery of society, there were still small human moments: the brush of a hand, the curve of music, the fleeting sense of belonging beneath the chandeliers. And as you let the images drift, velvet gowns swaying, candlelight flickering, distant violins softening into memory, you realize that history itself is like this: a grand ballroom of moments, some dazzling, some weary, all slipping gently into the past. The lives of those who danced before you linger only as quiet echoes, fading into the hush of time. So now, in this quiet space, you may allow the bustle to recede, the carriages roll away, the chandeliers dim, the whispers and laughter dissolve into stillness. What remains is only the gentle rhythm of breath, the steady calm of rest, and the comfort of knowing that the story has reached its gentle end. Let the lights fade, let the music hush, let the great ballroom fall into silence, and as you drift, may sleep come softly, like the last notes of a waltz, vanishing into the night.